The SNC-Lavalin affair, as those of you who have followed the Canadian mainstream media, is a political and economic scandal involving a Montreal, Quebec-based company, SNC-Lavalin, which allegedly has close ties to the current Canadian Prime Minister and Liberal leader Justin Trudeau. The affair started, according to the official version, in September 2018, when Prime Minister Trudeau asked Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was then serving as the Canadian Federal Justice Minister and Attorney General, to try to ensure that the SNC-Lavalin company would not be charged criminally for its one of its legal controversies. There has been legal controversy several years over its business operations in Kerala, one of India's federal states, so that it would only receive a fine. And then Wilson-Raybould, according to her version, felt that the Prime Minister was somehow pressuring her to try to ensure that SNC-Lavalin would get a lenient sentence. Allegedly, at least according to some media reports, and of course, according to the opposition parties, to guarantee SNC-Lavalin's generous provision of funds for the Liberal re-election campaign later this year, because Canada will hold its next federal parliamentary elections on October the 21st. This affair has significantly reduced the Canadian Liberal Party's popularity and has, to some extent, increased the Canadian Conservative Party's popularity, although it is still by no means certain that the Conservatives will win a clear majority in the upcoming federal elections. And of course, even if they do win, and even if they should win a landslide victory, something like 2/3 or even 3/4 of the seats, is no guarantee that they will be in power for 2 or more terms. Because if the Canadian electorate, which is increasingly critical, skeptical, pessimistic, probably cynical and apathetic, perceives that there are similar scandals or rumors or allegations thereof in the possible government of Prime Minister Andrew Scheer, should he take power, they might just as well switch their allegiance back to the Liberals or then to the New Democrats or some other parties. We, of course, are yet to see the emergence of a strong populist party. The former Conservative member of Parliament, well, he's still sitting in the House of Commons, but he broke away from the Conservatives in August 2018. Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada has only a minimal support in the electorate, at least according to the latest opinion polls. The Greens might make some kind of breakthrough, but because of the electoral system and because they are to some extent fighting over the same kinds of voters, left of center, environmentally conscious, socially liberal, and pro-multiculturalism, as are the New Democrats, that may well keep them from getting more than, at most, maybe 3 or 4 seats. So, in all likelihood, barring some major political scandal that would tarnish the Conservatives' reputation, such as a discovery that their prime ministerial candidate and federal leader Andrew Scheer would have engaged in some financial or ethical wrongdoing or crimes. Barring such an event, which would of course mean that many undecided voters would flock to the New Democrats Party, because there are always a certain number of people who favor the underdogs in elections, and because the New Democrats have never been in power federally. So to that extent, it is quite easy for them to claim that they are more ethical in government than the conservatives and liberals, since they are an untried political force at a federal level. They have formed governments in several provinces, mostly in Western Canada and in the early 1990s in Ontario. But in that case, they would probably be the chief beneficiaries unless the People's Party of Canada would get a rather large number of protest votes, or some new populist movement would suddenly pop up. In Europe, it's easier for these populist political parties to get at least some seats, because most European countries, continental European countries, employ some form of proportional representation. If Canada adopted at least a limited form of proportional representation, where, say, 20%, 25%, or 33%, in other words, 1/5, 1/4, or 1/3 of the seats were awarded on the basis of proportional representation, with a 5% vote threshold federally, then, for example, the Greens would get clearly more seats, and so would the New Democrats. That's why they would probably support any introduction of at least a partially proportional electoral system. But let's get now to the scandal. Where do we stand right now on April the 3rd, 2019? According to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's website, Prime Minister Trudeau has decided to eject, that is, expel Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, both of them former cabinet ministers, from the Liberal caucus or parliamentary group in the House of Commons. I assume that he's trying to somehow limit the damage and somehow show that he also takes some personal responsibility for the alleged ethical misdeeds of certain cabinet colleagues, although these two ladies are no longer in the Canadian federal cabinet. Or probably critics would argue that he's trying to sacrifice them as political liabilities in order to save his own skin, or that he's trying to stonewall it. In other words, claim that he acted in good faith, and then these two ladies apparently, or allegedly, or supposedly did not. He claims that the official reason for expelling these two ladies from the Liberal caucus was that trust with the two former cabinet ministers has been irreparably broken. He delivered the news to the National or Federal Liberal caucus in Ottawa on Tuesday night, so April the 2nd, Canadian time, saying the two could not stay on because they could not express confidence in the caucus. The trust that previously existed between these two individuals and our team has been broken, whether it's taping conversations, and in December 2018, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, who then was still serving as Justice Minister, had secretly taped a telephone call that she had with the then clerk of the Prime Minister's office. Without consent, or repeatedly expressing a lack of confidence in our government or me personally as leader, he said. It has become clear that Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott can no longer remain part of our Liberal team. Trudeau said he came to power determined to end the Liberal infighting that had dogged the party in the past. He said civil wars damage parties because they make Canadians believe politicians care more about internal party politics than serving the public. Trudeau said it's wrong for any politician to secretly record a conversation, but called it unconscionable that an attorney general would tape a conversation with the country's top civil servant, a reference to Wilson-Raybould's release last week of a recording of a phone conversation she had with clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, in December 2018. This political drama has been unfolding since February the 7th, 2019, when the Globe and Mail reported that Wilson-Raybould had faced inappropriate political pressure on the SNC-Lavalin criminal prosecution decision. Trudeau said Tuesday, that is on April the 2nd, 2019, he approached the issue with patience and understanding, but eventually concluded the two MPs could not remain in the caucus. He met the caucus executive and leadership before informing Wilson-Raybould and Philpott today of his decision. Liberal MPs gave Trudeau a standing ovation after his remarks turned into a campaign-style speech, and many expressed absolute support for the Prime Minister and his decision. Several also said they were saddened by the way things unfolded and the fact they had lost two colleagues. Wilson-Raybould tweeted the news before Trudeau addressed the caucus. I have just been informed by the Prime Minister of Canada that I am removed from the Liberal caucus, and as the confirmed Vancouver Granville candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada in the 2019 federal election, Wilson-Raybould tweeted. Later, the British Columbia MP said she is reflecting on what Trudeau has done and will talk to supporters about what happens next. She thanked those who believed in a new way of doing politics. She claimed in her statement that she can look at herself in the mirror knowing that she had done what was required to do and what needed to be done based on principles and values that must always transcend, that is, go beyond party. I have no regrets, she continued or concluded. I spoke the truth, as I will continue to do. Philpott, who was considered one of the Trudeau cabinet's most respected and competent members, said the development was profoundly disheartening. First Nations leaders condemned Wilson-Raybould, who is of Aboriginal origin, removal from caucus. Of course, one step that they could do would be to campaign as independent candidates or independent Liberal candidates in the upcoming federal elections, if they don't want to join any other political party. Of course, should either one or both of these two ladies join the Conservative Party, Andrew Scheer could hardly believe his luck, because he would have got one or two apparently quite competent and diligent politicians superficially for free. So there probably is going to be a great deal of condemnation, much of it hypocritical, of this decision. See how the Trudeau government is in disarray. I wish that the elections could be called this spring. But no, they can't, unless there's a vote in the Canadian House of Commons, advancing the elections to an earlier date. And then again, if the Prime Minister happened to be Andrew Scheer, many of the Conservative members of the House of Commons who are now loudly condemning the allegedly corrupt and incompetent Trudeau government, I don't think that they would be even nearly as vocal, because politics, sadly, is like that. That while many politicians, and this is what makes so many people so cynical about politicians, even though similar phenomena happen, they happen in education, they happen, unfortunately, even in Christianity, even in the so-called Bible-believing churches and movements and denominations. Of course, in business, in the civil organizations, in families, and so forth. Because of the universal sinfulness of the human nature, not because of the structures. The structures are a reflection and a symptom of that basic problem, but they are not the ultimate cause of it. Sorry for getting excited. I'm not a preacher. So Dr. Philpott wrote in a Facebook post, rather than acknowledge the obvious that a range of individuals had inappropriately attempted to pressure the former Attorney General, meaning Ms. Wilson-Raybould, in relation to a prosecutorial decision and apologize for what occurred, a decision was made to attempt to deny the obvious, to attack Jody Wilson-Raybauld's credibility and attempt to blame her. Obviously, the Conservative leader Andrew Scheer took advantage of the situation to score some or several or many cheap political points by claiming that the Liberals have chosen to condemn colleagues who spoke truth to power and to prop up a Prime Minister who is drowning in scandal. Canadians will view the removal of Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould from the Liberal caucus for exactly what it is, a betrayal of justice. Elected officials are supposed to protect individuals who blow the whistle on government misconduct and corruption, not punish them. But if Mr. Scheer was serving as the Prime Minister, not as the official opposition leader, when technically he has a wider freedom of speech and superficially a wider freedom of action, I don't honestly believe that he would be too eager to take responsibility. Forgive me for being too skeptical. But in any case, if the shoe was on the other foot, he might have done something similar, or then he could have called a royal commission into session, or had the House of Commons' judicial committee examine the matter or something like that. Earlier Tuesday, Ontario Liberal MPs met to debate whether to kick Wilson-Raybould and Philpott, the former Treasury Board president, out of the caucus. Philpott, who resigned from the cabinet early in March 2019 after saying she had lost confidence in the government's handling of the SNC-Lavalin affair, attended the meeting's start, then left saying she wanted to show respect for her colleagues who were engaged in a sensitive discussion. Several Liberals have publicly condemned Wilson-Raybould for taping her December the 19th conversation with Wernick. The clerk did not know he was being recorded. The 17-minute audio tape was submitted as evidence to the Commons' Justice Committee on Friday, March the 29th, 2019. In March 2019, Wilson-Raybould appeared before the Commons Justice Committee to answer questions about a Globe and Mail report citing unnamed sources that alleged she was pushed by senior officials in the Trudeau government to allow Quebec engineering firm SNC-Lavalin to avoid criminal prosecution on fraud and bribery charges by meeting a number of conditions laid out in a remediation agreement. Once before the committee, Wilson-Raybould told members of Parliament she had been improperly pressured by 11 officials in the Prime Minister's office. It's a kind of informal appendix to the Canadian federal cabinet, composed of advisors to the Prime Minister. And if the Prime Minister has truly or allegedly an authoritarian or leader-centered leadership style, then many decisions which are like outwardly approved by the federal cabinet and of course the federal parliament are actually made in the Prime Minister's office. If, on the other hand, the Prime Minister is truly a small d Democrat who delegates a lot of authority, then the Prime Minister's office plays mostly an advisory role, not truly or even informally or behind the scenes an executive role. My opinion. Wilson-Raybould said late on Monday, April the 1st, that she wanted to remain in the Liberal caucus and saw no reason why she should be expelled. I do not believe that I should be removed from caucus for doing my job and for doing what I believe is right, she told reporters as she left the House of Commons. The Conservatives, naturally enough, push for hearings. Well, to some extent, because some of them are genuinely concerned about the level of ethic governance in Canada, especially at the federal level. Some others, probably more people for political, partisan and electoral purposes, to embarrass and humiliate the Liberal government before the House of Commons will adjourn sometime in June, probably in the second half of June 2019 for the summer holiday and upcoming election campaign. Liberal Member of Parliament and Committee Chair Anthony Housefather said there have been plenty of opportunities for people to put their information forward. We agreed to stop oral meetings, but we've accepted submissions that have come in writing to the committee, and we've accepted them and make them public. Then trying to get back here. There was another one. Yeah, Wilson-Raybould reportedly warned that moving her from justice portfolio would be a mistake. But she was then moved in a change that was widely seen as a demotion to the Veterans Affairs portfolio in January, but she resigned even from it and at the same time from the cabinet in February 2019. So what does the Globe and Mail say? Canada's oldest English language daily newspaper, if I remember correctly. Let's see. Trying to find something. Yes, from the comments, ethical liberals are being forced out of the party. Readers respond to ousting of Wilson-Raybould, Philpott from Liberal caucus. Okay, let's go to the Toronto Star, which I think is Canada's most read daily newspaper. Okay. Star Vancouver. Now it's too late. Former Liberal director in British Columbia says Trudeau should have left, not Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. In other words, that Prime Minister Trudeau should himself have taken responsibility for this growing political scandal and resigned. Let's see. Susan Delacour. Jody Wilson-Raybould rewrote the book on how to lose your job. Quite a sarcastic comment. And Susan Delacour, 7 years after historic boxing match, Trudeau fights to stay in the ring. Okay, let's see, Wikipedia. Anyway, during an emergency meeting on February the 13th, 2019, the Liberal-dominated Justice Committee of the House of Commons voted down opposition bids to hear from the former Attorney General and key members of the Prime Minister's office, stating that the role of the committee is not an investigative body. Instead, the Liberals proposed to study some of the legal issues at the heart of the matter, such as the Shawcross Doctrine and deferred prosecution agreements. As a result, only current Justice Minister David Lametti, Deputy Justice Minister Nathalie Drouin, and Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick were originally invited to testify. The Canadian Senate is currently debating a motion put forward on February the 28th, so 5 weeks ago, to launch its own study into the affair, though it has not yet voted on it, at least not according to Wikipedia. So in response to the claims, the Justice Committee held a series of 3 public hearings on the alleged interference on February the 21st, 2019. Clerk of the Privy Council Wernick appeared before the committee and disputed the allegations of undue pressure on Wilson-Raybould and stated that the Globe and Mail article contained errors and unfounded speculation. Then on February the 27th, 2019, Wilson-Raybould testified under oath before the committee, corroborating the Globe and Mail's report and detailing the alleged obstruction campaign. And she said, and I quote, "For a period of approximately 4 months between September and December 2018, I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere in the exercise of prosecutorial discretion in my role as the Attorney General of Canada in an inappropriate effort to secure a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC-Lavalin." She provided details and dates of the meetings and named 11 people involved with the alleged efforts to interfere, including Trudeau, Wernick, Gerald Butts, Katie Telford, Bill Morneau, and other high-ranking officials in the Prime Minister's office and Ministry of Finance. On March the 6th, 2019, the Justice Committee held a hearing on the claims at which Butts testified. Gerald Butts, the former principal secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau, who had been implicated in the affair by Wilson-Raybould at the previous hearing, claimed that he did not want to discredit Wilson-Raybould's testimony, but wanted to offer his own different version of events. He stated that, in his opinion, or according to his belief, nothing inappropriate occurred, and that nothing inappropriate was alleged to have occurred until after the cabinet shuffle. He further stated that no concerns were raised by Wilson-Raybould until after the January the 12th cabinet shuffle had occurred. And in that shuffle, she was demoted to the Ministry of Veterans Affairs. During the committee hearing on March the 13th, 2019, Liberal MPs blocked an effort by the opposition to immediately invite Wilson-Raybould back to speak further about the government's efforts to put pressure on her, despite the former Justice Minister's willingness to testify again. On March the 19th, 2019, the Justice Committee held an in-camera meeting where Liberal members introduced and passed a motion to end any further probe into the SNC-Lavalin scandal, indicating that they preferred to leave any remaining investigation to the Ethics Commissioner. In a written letter to the committee chair, the Liberal member stated that no witness was prevented from providing evidence on any relevant information during the period covered by the waiver. On March the 29th, 2019, a recording of the telephone call between Wernick and Wilson-Raybould that happened on December the 19th, 2018 was released by the Justice Committee, where Wernick had told Wilson-Raybould that Prime Minister Trudeau wanted a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC-Lavalin one way or another. To which Wilson-Raybould responded that it would be an illegal political interference in the justice system and that she would not be comfortable having the conversation. Gerald Butts denied that Wilson-Raybould had been pressured to, but resigned from his position on February the 18th, just 6 days after Raybould had resigned, saying that the accusation that he had pressured Wilson-Raybould was distracting from the work of the Prime Minister's office. Jane Philpott, the president of the Treasury Board, resigned from her post in Trudeau's cabinet on March the 4th, stating that she had lost confidence in how the government had dealt with this matter and in how it had responded to the issues raised. Michael Wernick announced on March the 18th that he would be retiring ahead of schedule from his position as the clerk of the Privy Council and secretary to cabinet due to recent events, namely the erosion of trust and being seen as partisan, which would affect the civil service as a whole and cast serious doubts or serious doubt on his position should an opposition party form the next government. According to Wikipedia, the official opposition leader and conservative leader Andrew Scheer went so far as to state or claim, if you tell the truth, there is no room for you in the Liberal Party. Well, especially many people who are cynical about politics would say that in the mainstream political parties, there is little or no room for truth tellers. While that is not exactly true, the higher up you go, the more likely it is that there is a culture of secrecy and lies and half-truths. Once again, given the human nature's universal tendency towards sin. May God have mercy on all of us. Bye-bye.